From Hong Kong, Chicago, and the city of Stoke-on-Trent, this is the Classic Lenses podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 80. My name is Simon Forster and I'm joined by Johnny Sisson and Perry G. Hello, Johnny.
Hello.
And welcome home, Perry.
Hello.
Welcome back.
We've got to start with you, Perry.
All right.
Are you still jet lagged?
Yeah, I'm really jet lagged. I got back Saturday morning at 4 a.m. Hong Kong time.
Wow.
So if I say anything really stupid, then just chalk that down to the jet lag. Or if I'm speaking really slow for some reason, tell me and I'll speed up. But yeah, no, I had a great 2 weeks driving across the east coast of Canada, and it's tough leaving the kind of crisp, cool air of the Canadian East Coast summer and coming back to the sort of stifling, humid heat of Hong Kong that's increasingly punctuated by the occasional blast of tear gas.
And how about you, Johnny? Have you got stifling heat over there where you are? Or
it's been over 70, so for me, yeah, that's stifling heat. But it's been hot-ish and humid-ish, but not terrible, and it's very gray today and overcast. So it's supposed to rain later today. So I keep saying I'm going to spend the day developing. We'll see. Maybe if we get this wrapped up quick, I'll do a bunch of developing today. We'll see.
And for those that are mildly interested in the weather in Stoke-on-Trent at the moment, we're just having a typical normal British summer. So it's cloudy. It was raining earlier. We may get some sun, and then we'll probably get some more rain later. Okay, so before we get going on properly with today's show, I just want to say a thank you to the voodoo child himself, Eric Sluice, for being with us last week and looking after Perry's seat for us and doing a great job for us. So thank you, Eric. And actually, this is also worth just thanking to Ricardo Bayon as well. So two people that have been keeping Perry's seat warm and doing a great job for us. So thank you both. So Perry, you better be good today, because the people that have been on the last 2 weeks, they knocked it out the park again. So
yeah, they were good episodes. I listened to them. I drove because my girlfriend doesn't drive, so I drove 3,000 kilometers over the course of our trip. We went from all around Nova Scotia into Prince Edward Island, all around Prince Edward Island into New Brunswick, and then back to Halifax. I realize that's not going to make any sense to people who don't know Canadian geography, but that's basically the entire east coast of Canada, minus Newfoundland. And so I did listen to both episodes, and I particularly enjoyed your game of what was the question again? when you were discussing Nigel Cliff's question. And well done, you guys, for both keeping me entertained, and also the only time I was yelling at the speakers during both of those episodes was when you were answering that question, I think from some dude on Instagram who was asking you about technology invading photography and the arsenal. Oh, and nice, you guys all thought he was either talking about the football club or your entire arsenal lens. When I'm like, no, guys, he's talking about that stupid ad that everyone gets on Facebook, or everyone who has a passing interest in photography, where it's some kind of thing that you stick on top of your camera, and it's advertised as revolutionary AI that will pick your shutter speed and aperture for you.
I think I probably nasty spammed that thing so many times that they blocked me, so I don't see that anymore.
Yeah, I've looked into it after a couple of people asked me should I buy this? So I clicked on it and read what it was, and I was like, no, you shouldn't buy this. There's nothing this thing can do that you can't do yourself, except maybe save you some time on their time lapse. It's so stupid.
I must admit, it was. We chatted about this before. You did, because you offline. You told us off what it was, and it was. I had seen it, it all came back to him, and I dared to look it up, because the concern is like you look something like this up, and then you're going to be followed around by adverts for it everywhere. And I think I did it on secret mode or whatever it was, so that they wouldn't track me. And I remember now, because I remember looking at it, thinking, "So what is this wonderful thing that's going to help it?" And I've read it, and I was thinking, I was still none the wiser as to what it did. So in the end, I think the reason why I can't remember it is because I just blocked it out of my head as being a complete and utter irrelevance. So it looks like I made a good call on that.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
Yeah. So apart from his misunderstanding or blocking out for understandable reasons, that advert. So the rest of it wasn't too bad then for you.
No. I mean, I was driving, and one thing that I don't drive in Hong Kong. So one thing I realized is like listening to podcasts when I'm driving, especially on like a highway where I'm going like 120. I don't pay as full attention as I do. So I pretty much just enjoyed the conversations for the most part. And I think like, Ricardo is spot on about that Nikkor 105 being like just fantastic bang for your buck as far as like a telephoto goes.
Mm-hmm.
But that lens it's fantastic, right? And I have two of them. I have the AI version in Nikon F mount, and I have the LTM version. And I bought the AI one like a decade ago, and I bought the LTM one relatively recently out of gas because it was like I have to have the lens. It's a sonar, but I swear I've used them like twice, and I don't know why I have them.
That's why I haven't dipped into anything longer than 50 millimeters yet on rangefinder, because I'm convinced I'll get obsessed with it and never use it. Although I do want that 75. Actually, I want your 75, Perry. We've talked about this.
Oh yeah, sure.
Your stupid black. Is it silver or black? Which offensive color is it?
I'm going to talk about this later about when I talk about like the new lens that I got. But yeah, it's a silver version. It comes in black, and I have a serious like psychological problem with putting a silver lens on a black camera when that lens is also available in black. I just sit there and go like, I should have bought the black one. I'm an idiot. Like, why did I buy the silver one just because it's cheaper? Like the one I have is mint. It's perfect. Like there's not a blemish on it. But I've used it once, and I just can't bring myself to put it on camera because it's the wrong color.
Well, just a quick one on the talk about these 105s. In our Facebook group for the Classic Lenses Podcast Facebook group, there's loads of comments on last week's show, but there's a whole thread in itself about the differences between the versions of the Nikon 105 2.5, and JP Holden is coming close to begging us to talk about it, and which we've talked about it.
We have talked about it.
But I think a few of our comments though are spread over different shows. But I think the area that I think we were encouraged to talk about was the difference in rendering between the later versions and the sonar versions. And I think we should just at least touch upon that just to make JP Holden a little bit happier. And it's just for me, it's just the difference between any sonar and any planar, because they're the two versions that we were talking about. And planars are very, very well corrected lenses, and sonars are not as well corrected, and it's that's ultimately the difference between the two. You get different kinds of aberrations going on with the with sonars. They're harder to correct. They do stranger things with the out of focus areas in a shot, and it's those stranger things are the things that are pretty much what draw us to using those kinds of lenses, because planar designs are closer to modern designs. In fact, I would probably say the most lenses are ultimately based off planars, the really, really high quality ones. Actually, I'm not entirely sure now if the if these like Zeiss Otis things are truly planars. But we've had this discussion before now, where we think, well, when is a sonar still a sonar? And when we had Jason Lane on there, he was saying, well, it's ultimately like the roots of the design of the lens. The fact that you've got more elements in the lens doesn't mean it's not related to the design that it came from. So, which is fair enough. But yeah, planars are just closer to being to perfection. And
hello, Simon.
Have you lost?
Oh man, that was perfect.
Okay, yeah, agree with everything you said there, Simon.
did something go horribly wrong there?
we caught the first 5 seconds of what you said and the last 2 seconds.
Yeah, and your audio dropped out. We could still hear each other, and all we said during that whole time was that was boring anyway. And then you came back with the tail end of it.
Okay, well, that's there you go, JP Holden. I hope I've given you the full and concise answer, which I won't repeat that one again now.
We'll find
definitive.
Well, I'll look for this sonar episode and put a link to it in the notes for this episode's podcast. Then you can go back.
As long as Simon still has the recording of his audio. I mean, the only thing I want to add, and like, stop me if you said this already, is I don't think the AI and AIS versions are technically double, like planar designs. They're not double Gausses. But yeah, the difference is the same, right? The AI and AIS.
I thought they were. I thought they were double Gauss.
No, if you look at a diagram, they're not double Gausses.
What are they then?
They're their own thing, but they have this same kind of qualities. Like the AI and AIS are sharper. The sonar is nicer looking. Yeah, that's my take on it.
You're just rocking my world at the moment. I don't know if I can let this one go.
All right, hold on. Let's just Google this here. Lens diagram.
Lens diagram. Googling. Here you go.
Nikon AF 105 lens diagram. All right, let's see what we get.
You keep on talking, Perry. Well,
I'm googling.
This is like that time when Simon's audio dropped out and there was no sound and we were just chatting amongst ourselves. This would be a good Jason Lane question. It really would be, because that's the 2.8. Hold on a second.
Anyway, I just dropped you a link with supposedly a lens diagram for it. Yeah, because the sonar has like just one block at the back.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's a double Gauss. It's because there's that giant fat second element, right? Which isn't mirrored.
Right.
Yeah, it's not. It's. I can see why you're not entirely convinced by that, but I mean, it is sort of. I mean, it's a six element design, and it's sort of symmetrical in a way that, although it's not.
How is that symmetrical? If you looked at someone's face,
hold on a second. No. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. So no, actually, the one I'm actually looking for here, that's a sonar. Surely. This is great podcast entertainment, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't this great? We're all looking. This is like, you know what this reminds me of when people like in the news now, they just write articles now about what people said on Twitter about something that happened. It's, I don't give a what happened on Twitter. What? How does informing me what a bunch of random idiots on Twitter said about something tell me about the actual news that happened?
So I just sent you another link, and it has diagrams for all of them. So the sonar does look different. The rear element is like clearly close to symmetrical. Like, click on the second link I just sent you. It's got the sonar on top, and then the second diagram is the AI, which is what I sent you originally. See, I did my homework and looked this up, and now you guys are like forcing us to Google stuff.
Oh Oh man, I'm looking at the link now too. Well, we'll put the links here in the podcast notes, and this podcast will be very much more entertaining when you saw the notes about what we were talking about.
This link is from Nikkor, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically we can just blame JP Holden for and my hesitancy to talk about this subject has been borne out as well. So so there we go. If this has upset anybody, it's JP Holden's fault. So
there we go.
Where should we go from here? Was there something else we wanted to talk about on this subject, which I can't remember what we were talking about?
What was the question again?
Exactly. We're back on last week as well, aren't we? I know. Let's go to Perry because Perry's been doing lots of interesting things. So Perry, tell us more about your holiday stroke vacation.
Yeah, sure. The first thing before I went was I spent we've been planning this trip for quite a while, so I spent a unreasonably long amount of time deciding what gear to bring. So I knew that I was going to shoot puffins and hopefully whales because we had whale watching and puffin watching tours booked. And then I knew that I wanted to try to shoot the Milky Way. We had that discussion about picking up that Laowa. But I realized that the first thing I realized was I didn't have a camera bag that was suitable. So I ended up picking up a Low Pro 35 AW transit backpack, which is a sweet backpack that carries weight really well, but it's got a sort of upper compartment, so you can use it as a day bag. And I went a little bit overboard because I knew we were going to have a car, so I could just dump everything in there. So I brought a tripod and a GorillaPod. I didn't end up using the GorillaPod at all. And so I ended up here's what I ended up bringing. I brought my Sony A7R II, that Laowa 15mm f2. I brought 2 autofocus lenses for the Sony for birds and shit. The Canon 400-5.6L with a Metabones adapter, and then just this Samyang 35 thing, kind of as a body cap for the Sony. And then for film, I changed my mind on this a million times. But basically, the only thing I could fit in this backpack was my Leica CL with the 40 Summicron, with the Voigtlander 21mm f4 color scope R, and my Zeiss 85mm f4 Tele Tessar, plus a JCH case with 5 rolls of portrait in it. So deciding on specifically which rangefinder gear to bring was extremely difficult because I knew what I wanted to shoot with the Sony. And I just kept changing my mind, and in the end I literally didn't use anything except the CL and the 40 Summicron. I didn't even take the other 2 lenses out of the bag. So there was some redundancy there. And then in the end I didn't actually end up shooting that much with my Leica. I brought 5 rolls of portrait. I shot a roll and a half and just sent the first fully shot roll to the lab. But the rest of the time, I pretty much just shot with my cell phone, except for the Astro and the Puffins. And there was one day when we were in this really strange 18th century fortress called Louisburg Fortress. And people there were dressed in I guess this must be what it's like being Eric and living in Mons, because everyone was dressed in
except without dragons.
yeah, minus the dragon. So everyone was dressed in period garb, and it was very odd. So it seemed like a very appropriate time to shoot film. So I put a roll through that day, but apart from that, even though the scenery was absolutely stunning, I mean, we had beautiful weather all the way throughout. The landscapes on Cape Breton and Prince Edward Island are just they're mind-blowingly gorgeous. But I was having such a good time enjoying the moment and also being disconnected from devices and just living out there on the East Coast, that I didn't really want to sort of interrupt the joy of being.
Oh, so little situation here on the podcast. apparently we lost Simon, and therefore we lost Simon's expert engineering capabilities. So we've jumped over to another way to record this bit of the podcast, which is on Skype. So you may notice some difference in the audio, and we apologize for that. But anyway, we'll get back where we were. Perry, you were talking about being on vacation and not wanting to interrupt the moment, as it were, with fumbling around with various pieces of equipment.
Yeah, so I'm not sure where we lost Simon, because the internet in Stoke-on-Trent apparently is down. Well, I don't know about the entire city, but at least in Simon's house. But I was talking about how like photography is a really involving process for me, and so I have to like switch on into photo mode. And this vacation was so enjoyable that, like, apart from the moments where I was on and photographing, like shooting puffins or astrophotography, I didn't really feel like interrupting the moment with busting out my cameras and like going into photo mode. And I found that just kind of taking out my phone and taking a few pictures, snapping a few snapshots for my own memory was good, because it didn't require me to kind of like leave the joy of the moment.
Yeah, totally makes sense to me. And I think I had mentioned, I don't know if it made it in or not, but that's when I tend to use my Fuji X100S the most, because I can't do it on a phone. It just kind of frustrates me that it's handy, but it seems like a barrier. I don't usually use it to shoot with, but the X100S it's really just a point and shoot, digital point and shoot. So that's when I use that camera the most, actually, is traveling. And for the same reason, I'd rather just kind of be in the moment,
Yeah, I mean, I think I used to have an X100T, and like I agree, it's the perfect camera for that, because you can just kind of have it on your side and then just pick it up and click and then carry on with whatever you were doing.
Right.
Normally, I would use I've got a Ricoh GR digital point and shoot that I would use for that kind of thing. But
yeah,
the phone that I got recently, it's a Huawei P30 Pro. It's a really good phone, camera phone. So like, I find that it just saves me the hassle from having to carry another digital camera.
Right. Totally makes sense.
Yeah, and I kind of surprised myself, because a lot of the times when I go on vacations to exotic locations, I do spend a lot of time shooting, or I almost like set aside parts of, whether for exploring old temples or seeing cool landscapes or people in their local environments like that I want to shoot. But in this instance, it didn't. I guess it didn't feel right. And I'm not really sure why. It's just like some part of me thought, I was reflecting on this on the way back, and part of me thought, like, the kinds of things that were in front of me aren't the kinds of things that I'm normally interested in shooting anyway. Like, I haven't shot landscapes seriously for just so many years. But I think also it was just the mindset that you're in, because when you take photos, you do then have to do a little bit of work on them, right? Whether it's developing them on film or like post-processing them digitally. Right. And I just, knowing that was something that would have to happen next, I almost didn't feel like doing it, because it was like, I'm not here to create an image. I'm here to enjoy this experience. Right.
Yeah. And right. And I think there's something to be said with, you're on vacation with, a partner, significant other, etc. It's like, how much time do you really want to spend, in photo mode, which is what they see you doing all the time. So in a way, it's kind of like a nice break for the people you're with also.
Yeah. And I think, there are some times when like they can be totally understanding with that. Cause like my girlfriend enjoys taking photos too. And sometimes, when we travel to some of the places in Southeast Asia, where there are some like really striking street scenes in like markets and stuff, she'll also want to bust out a camera and do some street photography around like Thailand or shooting monks in temples in Cambodia and stuff. But when it's just like miles and miles of like pristine nature, especially
seriously.
because it was mostly in daylight, sort of, not like sunrise, sunset, or any particularly special light. You want to kind of enjoy the ability to just look around and breathe the air and have a chat without then, staring at each other, staring through a viewfinder.
Totally.
And then digital staring at a screen.
Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think it's another reason I kind of, a lot of times when people say, hey, I'm going on vacation, it's like those posts on our various, groups that we're in on Facebook, etc. I'm going on vacation. What gear should I take? And I kind of feel like, and I mean, I'm guilty of that too. I've gone through that thought process, but I think what I end up doing is I just end up taking the gear I shoot every day because I'm familiar with it and I don't have to spend as much time messing around with the stuff that I'm most familiar with. It feels like more natural. You know what I mean? So I feel like I just use the gear I shoot normally when I travel because that's what I shoot with. And I'm kind of So when I want to shoot something, it feels like just more of a natural part of my day-to-day activity anyway, versus a special thing that I'm doing with a special camera or whatever because I'm traveling. Does that make any sense?
No, it makes total sense because with the exception of the 2 lenses on the Sony that I brought for a very specific purpose, and I did use them for that purpose, and I'll talk about that in a moment. With my rangefinder, I never changed lenses. Like of the 3 lenses I brought, here in Hong Kong, 90% of the time I'm shooting with a 35 millimeter lens. With my Leica CL, I just kept the 40 millimeter Summicron on the entire time because that's how I shoot normally. And this has totally happened to me in the past. Sometimes it's different because a lot of the times when I travel, I bring my XT10. So it's not a film camera, and I pretty much only use that for travel. So usually I'll bring the XT10 with like 3 really small rangefinder lenses or maybe a Fuji 18 millimeter f2 autofocus lens. And so in that case, it's like it's new, it's different gear. So I am swapping around a little bit more. But on the trips where I do bring like a film camera, especially one of my Leicas, I almost never change lenses. I'm trying to remember the last time. The last time I can remember actually changing a lens was a trip to Germany last summer where I wanted to take some super wide angle shots. So I took off the 35 mil and I put on the 21 mil. Apart from that, like the lens I use normally stays on all the time, but that's also the same as Hong Kong. Like when I'm shooting day to day, it's mostly 35 mil. And sometimes when there's when I want an ultra wide shot, I'll take it off and put the 21 on. So it really is no different. Yeah, you're totally right there. So just bring the stuff you normally bring.
Yeah. And I mean, I do that pretty often, just daily. I'll carry, a lot of times I'll carry two cameras with 2 different lenses, like a 35 and a 50 or a 35 and a 21 or whatever. So then I can just like pull a different camera out that's already set up and ready to go. And sometimes maybe I'll also have like a third lens in the bag just in case I need to, like a longer lens for a particular use, but I don't use it very often. So I mean, I think about making it quick and convenient and keeping it in like the zone that you're usually in anyway is a good way to do it. So you're not kind of distracted by all the different gear and thinking about all the different choices. You get that like choice paralysis.
and thinking back, I was having a chat with Rob Jameson on Facebook Messenger about not wanting to bring like loads of gear to areas where you might sort of have questionable, if not safety issues, just like being unable to lock things the way that you normally would.
Oh yeah.
But also on that, I think the last few trips I've gone on have been like really short, just weekend excursions. And I've just brought the Bessa R with the Canon 35 f2 LTM because like I only bring a backpack. I travel really light on those weekend excursions. And I think subconsciously I know like this is all I need. This is all I really need to use. And if I lose my best R for whatever reason, I'm not going to be heartbroken because it's easily replaced. And like I've never felt the need to switch to a different lens because I was using it for general purpose shooting as opposed to like a very specific purpose. Because I do think, you know, the flip side of that is if you're traveling specifically for photography, right? And a lot of people do that. If you're like driving through, I don't know, Yosemite or something, right? Or you're visiting like a really exotic place for a long period of time, there are going to be instances where as like a travel photographer almost, you're not going to want to be missing the gear. Because if you're like in the middle of, I don't know, the Sahara Desert and you need a specific lens, you can't exactly go and like grab it, right? Or even rent one from a shop. So the context and the goal of what you're trying to do with your travel makes a big difference too.
Oh, for sure.
I do know there are a lot of people who like travel almost specifically for the purpose of taking travel photos. Mm-hmm. And in those cases, I think it's totally legit to like pack tons of stuff, even if you don't use a lot of it.
Yeah. And I really have that that feeling about security. I mean, I kind of feel that way even in Chicago. I mean, I always keep my stuff on me. I never ever leave cameras in a car. I mean, I wouldn't leave them in a hotel room. So basically, I only carry as much stuff as I can carry on my person the entire time. So carrying too much stuff can be really problematic in that case if you've got 5 cameras and 12 lenses or whatever. So I make a point of I only carry what I literally can physically carry with me continuously. So that helps to kind of keep down the amount of stuff as well, perhaps.
I think I'm like that too. Usually, even on these little weekend excursions, what I'll do is I'll just stick a little sort of day bag into my master suitcase or my master backpack, and then only put whatever gear I can fit into that. It was different on this trip because a lot of the times I left my gear in the car and then just took a smaller camera bag for whatever we were doing at the time. But it's the East Coast of Canada. Like there's no one there.
Right.
Like unless a moose is gonna break into my car and then like use its antlers to take pictures, I wasn't worried. I wasn't worried at all in that context. But I totally know what you mean. Like even if it's kind of secure, you don't want to leave especially expensive stuff lying around in a hotel room,
right,
or anywhere where someone might be tempted to like bust in and take a look, right?
Yeah. I'm always concerned about that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think from an engagement point of view, as I think Simon would say, it would be interesting to hear from any listeners about how they travel, how they choose what gear to put out. Wait, I think the Sunny 16 podcast asked like exactly this question last week on one of their shows.
Oh, did they? Yeah.
Yeah. So scrap that. We're not going to copy them.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we done with that topic?
Yeah, I guess so. Although, you talked a bit about astro photography?
Yeah. So
were you going to talk about that lens you used a bit?
Yeah. So I think the next thing I wanted to talk about was what I actually did shoot. So I used the Leica for like 1.5 rolls of Portra, but the stuff that I brought specifically to shoot, I did use it. So the Laowa 15mm f2, which I bought specifically for this trip, we got lucky. On one of the nights, it rained kind of early evening, which cleared up all of the lingering clouds in the sky. So by the time night fell, the sky was crystal clear. Wow. And we did manage to catch a glimpse of the Milky Way. And the timing was perfect because sometimes the Milky Way rises at like 2 or 3 a.m. And so even if it's there, it's not ideal to shoot when you're traveling with a partner. I'm not going to drag my girlfriend out at 2 a.m. to like look, right? No, but we got lucky. It rose at about 10 o'clock. And sky was crystal clear and we could see it basically right next to our Airbnb. So we just had to kind of walk outside and then go to a sort of cliff side. And so shooting astro with this thing was kind of interesting because like I've done this before with other lenses, and it's been a while since I've used kind of a modern lens. And the first thing that like annoyed me a lot was infinity wasn't infinity, and a lot of modern lenses do this. They'll go past infinity, which I understand for autofocus lenses because it's got to like rack past infinity and then try to find the point. And I even get it to a certain extent with manual focus lenses because manufacturers will say things like in different temperature conditions, the infinity point can change.
Yeah.
But it still really annoys me when a lens doesn't have like a hard infinity stop.
Yeah.
And this one did go a little bit past infinity. So I had to like use the zoom in function on my Sony to actually get the shot. But I posted one of the photos that I shot of the Milky Way with like a house in the foreground.
Yeah.
And I think Lawrence Dunn, who does quite a lot of astro, was like giving me advice to avoid sources of light pollution like that house, which I think makes sense. But in this context, just to give an idea of where we were, there was a very small town kind of behind where we were standing with a little bit of light from the town coming out. And then in front of us was literally a cliff, like a 200-foot cliff that went straight down into the ocean. So my choices of foreground were literally either absolutely nothing or this house. And so I have a shot of just the Milky Way, but that's boring, right? You can go on like NASA.com and look at that in much better quality. So I actually enjoyed sort of sticking the house in the foreground, composing with its ultra wide, and then doing the long exposure for astro. Yeah, it worked pretty well. The other shot I have is kind of a one of those like shots of me and my girlfriend standing there looking at the stars. So I wasn't going to post that publicly.
Yeah. Well, I really like that shot with the house, and kind of for the reason that you mentioned. To me, it's a lot more interesting than just a plain, Milky Way in the sky kind of shot, because like you said, you can get NASA's gigantic high resolution shots of that if you want, but I think placing it in a location that you're in is a lot more interesting.
Yeah, totally. Because I think if you're only shooting the Milky Way, or you're shooting like, especially hardcore astro where you're using like a telescope to shoot nebulas and stuff, that's more of an exercise in like technical photography for me.
Yeah.
Whereas for my taste, if you're going to shoot the Milky Way, I really prefer the shots that have like the context of the landscape, so that you're seeing the Milky Way as part of an overall image, rather than just like a technically well executed picture of the Milky Way itself, just to show like I did it because I can, right?
Yeah, totally makes sense.
Oh man, but post processing Milky Way pictures is a pain in the butt. I don't even want to get into that, but I've done it before, and I remember it being a pain in the butt. Because I don't do, like, people who shoot Milky Way, a lot of them do stuff like focus stacking, or like blending multiple exposures. I'm way too lazy to do that kind of crap.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm just like taking the one raw file out of the Sony, and even then you got to do a whole bunch of stuff with adjusting your white balance, and then like making sure that there's a whole lot of editing, because the picture you get out looks nothing like the final image. Right?
Yeah.
Like, you've got overexposed bits here, and then the sky is more sort of gray than black. And then the Milky Way is, you can see it pretty clear in the raw file, but it doesn't kind of stand out in any meaningful way. So you really got to adjust like whites and blacks and contrast and colors to really make it stick out. And it took me much longer to edit the picture than actually shoot the damn thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that kind of stuff drives me crazy.
I did realize, though, that f2 is totally unnecessary. Because I think I shot most of the images of the Milky Way at f2.8. The exposures were somewhere between, 15 seconds or 30 seconds. But especially given the ISO performance of these newer cameras, I think I could have gotten away with an f4 lens even.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just push the ISO up, and you're good.
Yeah, because you got to kind of push the ISO anyway.
Yeah.
So at that point, I think, back in the day, people were able to shoot Milky Way shots on film, right? It was doable.
Right. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're jacking up your ISO to like 3200 or 6400 and the performance is still pretty good, to me, I don't see that much of a difference with like an ISO 800, 1600, 3200 shot on the Sony that is meaningful enough to really need a fast lens. Because at f2, it just makes less stuff in focus in the foreground and also just makes it more difficult to focus precisely.
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So I didn't need to buy that lens, is my point. I could have brought I'm pretty sure I could have brought like the Voigtlander super wide HeliR and did a reasonably good job with that.
Yeah. That's kind of my thought as well. Even buying system lenses for these cameras, like the Fuji cameras, they have, the super fast lenses like 16 millimeter 1.4s and all that, but then they've got this great line of lenses that are, they're all like f2, 23 f2, 35 f2, 50 f2, and they're much smaller, they handle better, and it's like, well, you can, if you need the 1.4, just bump the ISO up one stop. It's not gonna cause a great deal of trouble. I mean,
yeah, I think that's true. Although, as like, I think both of us have Fuji cameras, right? I've had quite a few of those lenses, and I gotta say, specifically against that line, I never really liked the 23 f2 or the 35 f2. Mm-hmm. I really like the 35 1.4, and I think it is just a traditional like double Gauss design. Yeah. Whereas the 35 f2 has like 1 billion elements in like 1,000 groups.
Right.
And so like to me, the 35 1.4, even though the autofocus is slower, it looks really nice. And then I used to have the 16 1.4, but I sold it because I didn't use it very much. But that lens is fantastic.
Yeah, it is a nice lens.
It's outstanding. Yeah. But I totally see what you mean. Like, those lenses, it's not so much the speed that's necessary as just like having it there because you can.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think so. All right.
So, well, yeah.
I was gonna say any other real highlights from your travels, photographically or even otherwise?
Yeah, the only other one photographically was the Puffins. Now, like, I'm not going to talk about this too much because I was using a autofocus lens, a Canon one with a Metabones adapter. But, a lot of the shots that I ended up getting, apart from the ones with the Puffins in flight, were like, I got to use autofocus because they're small and they're fast as hell. And we're on a moving boat. And I don't, even in this situation, like, I'm not a super big fan of using burst mode. But there's no way in hell I'm getting Puffins in flight with manual focus.
Right.
But what I did find was, like, when we were shooting Puffins and also whales, because we got really lucky and saw like some pretty amazing sort of marine life. When they're in the water, I found myself using manual focus a lot more, possibly because I'm just more comfortable with it, but also possibly because I think autofocus really struggles in that situation because you've got like waves and water and all this stuff. And like, I don't think the camera knows what the hell I want to focus on. Right. Because like with moving waves, the camera will just sort of focus on whatever the movement of the boat and the waves had centered at that very moment.
Right.
So what I ended up doing was almost like zone focusing. I would like watch when a puffin sort of dove underwater, and I would like zone focus on the point where it went underwater, knowing that it's going to come back out at that same point.
That's smart. Yeah.
It was the only way I could get the shot because with autofocus, nothing was in focus because it kept focusing on like the closest wave tip to the camera, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, those were kind of cool, and I got to gloat a little bit because right before I went on this trip, Hamish Gill went on a puffin seeing tour as well. I think in the UK. So we were chatting about this. He didn't see any puffins, so he's jealous of my shot.
Oh, really? Yeah. Puffinless puffin tour, huh?
Yeah. We went to a rock where like they nest, so we knew that they were going to be there, and we just kind of watched them from a distance on a boat. Whereas I think he tried to find them in the UK, somewhere where they sometimes are.
Oh, okay. All right.
But apart from that, yeah, the trip was super nice. I mean, the weather was perfect. We ate a lot of great Canadian seafood, mostly lobster, and just
I was just going to ask you about the lobster.
Really?
Yeah, seriously.
Well, I mean, there's no, one thing that annoys me, right, is like people from Maine, they always go on about their lobster, right? But like
Right.
Maine shares, if you look at a map of the U.S. and a map of Canada, Maine just kind of like cuts into the eastern corridor of Canada, and it takes like a chunk out of eastern Quebec, just so they can fish lobster in the Canadian waters, because like it's right next to Nova Scotia. All the lobsters are coming out from that area. So yeah, I mean, they're just super fresh. They're super cheap. They're super delicious. My girlfriend and I, we kept a lobster count, because like there's just nowhere else in the world where you're going to get lobster this fresh and this cheap.
Right.
And I think we had lobster like 17 times.
Wow.
On the trip. Because in Hong Kong, it's super expensive and it's not that good. And so like she always accuses me of being a seafood snob because I won't eat the lobster here because I'm like, it's overpriced and it's no good. But now she is fully converted to the Canadian Maritime.
Yeah, the cold water lobster. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. Yeah. So tell me this. This is an important lobster question, Perry G. Do they do... Because so my family is from the Boston area, my dad's side. So I spent a lot of time on Cape Cod, and they have a lot of lobsters out there too. So part of the best part of visiting that part of the world to me was always eating lobster rolls. Do they make lobster rolls in Nova Scotia?
Oh yeah, not just in Nova Scotia, across the entire East Coast.
Yeah.
Now. The cool thing there was like almost everywhere we went, their lobster rolls and their seafood chowder was a little different.
Yeah.
And the best lobster roll we had was in a little tiny town in Prince Edward Island, called the Lobster Barn. And basically like they do lobster rolls the way they're supposed to be, where it's just like a toasted buttered bun with like a piece of lettuce and then just huge chunks of lobster, like entire claws and stuff.
Yes, that sounds like a perfect lobster roll.
Yeah, with just a little bit of mayo on top or something, right?
Yeah.
Because there are some places that will basically tear up the lobster and mix it almost into like a weird lobster salad where there's more mayo than lobster.
Right.
And they give you a lobster roll where you can barely taste the lobster, right? And that's like a super obnoxious way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The right way is to have basically like an entire lobster almost fully intact in the roll. Minimal.
I totally agree.
Yeah. So we had plenty of that. But the last one was the best. And one of the great things about the entire area is it's relatively it's not that touristy. There aren't loads and loads of tourists kind of causing crowds everywhere, partly because it's such a pain to get there. It's like a 4-hour drive to Cape Breton from the nearest big airport in Halifax.
Wow.
And that was just really refreshing because especially here in Asia, almost everywhere you go for travel, there's going to be like billions of tourists.
Yeah.
But, not just the lobsters. The mussels in Prince Edward Island are outstanding.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, because, it was the kind of place where like you could point to one of the restaurants, they like pointed to the bay behind the restaurant and they were like, the mussels came from there. we were walking along the beach one day and there's just like oysters and mussels and clams just there all over the place in the water as we're walking along the coast. So I mean, it doesn't get any fresher than the Canadian. I still think though that the best way to eat a lobster is just whole lobster in front of you with some butter. Lobster rolls are great, but the entire thing is better, in my opinion.
Yes. Yeah. No doubt. Wow. Well, that's outstanding. I am really jealous. That's a part of the world I have always wanted to visit, also, and I have never been there. And I love the sort of the East Coast. along the Atlantic right there is great. So I hope I can get there someday. That's amazing.
Yeah, the Maritimes are a really nice place to visit because people are so chill. And I've been there before. This is, I think, my second long trip across the Canada East Coast. But my girlfriend's lived in Hong Kong her whole life, so she's not used to like people being friendly and just sort of chatting with you and having conversations like normal human beings.
Yeah.
So there was, I think our first encounter with like a random person was in a local drugstore. We were picking up some stuff from the road, and this super friendly guy named Steve just came up and had a chat with us about where we were from, what we were doing. And I could see in my girlfriend's eyes that she was like doing this calculation in her head, being like, what does he want? Why is he talking to us?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You want to rob us? Does he want money from us? Like, what's going on here? I don't know if that's a Hong Kong thing or a city thing. I think it's a city thing.
I think it's a city thing. I get in that mode too sometimes, because if some random person in Chicago just starts talking to you, they're going to ask you for money right after they tell you the story about how they're stranded and they need money to get to the bus and their kids are waiting for them at the station. It's that whole thing. So
yeah, exactly. I feel like that in Toronto as well sometimes. So I think it's a city thing where, when there's so many people around, you can't possibly acknowledge each one as a human being, or you're never going to get anything done, right?
Yeah.
So the entire crowd of the city sort of dehumanizes it. Whereas when you're in a place like the East Coast of Canada, where there's like, there was one town we went to where the population was literally like 700 people. So you have to talk to every single person you encounter. And that was another weird thing. Like when we were in Lewisburg in Nova Scotia, I was taking a lot of portraits of people, sort of animal mystery style, just like stopping them and asking them if I could take their portrait. Yeah. And I realized that the language barrier in Hong Kong is what's stopping me from doing that, and not just necessarily the city barrier.
Oh, okay.
I can't articulate well enough in Chinese, like a justification for me wanting to take the photo. And with my terrible Chinese, I think it's really easy to get like unsettled by some random person asking you if you can take their portrait, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, whereas I think earlier today I posted a shot of like this guy in Lewisburg selling bread, like wearing a baker's outfit, and that was one of those, just having a chat with him and then asking him if I could take his photo, and he's like, yeah, totally. Hold up a piece of bread.
Yeah. Yeah,
Woo!
Cool.
So that's the East Coast trip, and now we're back in Hong Kong.
Yeah, well, congratulations on a great voyage and a great journey. It sounds like it was a lot of fun.
Thank you. So is there anything that you want to update us on, or you want to talk about?
I've certainly not any travels. I haven't been anywhere this summer, so maybe sometime soon, we'll see. But I've just been here in Chicago the whole time, so I don't have any exciting travel stories to talk about, unfortunately. I mean, I guess, not to change the subject on a totally different direction, but I guess that's what I'm going to do. I mean, the big news for me this week, quite honestly, was that I guess I'd have to call her my biggest photographic inspiration / mentor, and my instructor that I worked the most with when I was at the School of the Artists of Chicago passed away this week. And that was Barbra Crane. She was 91 years old. And I mean, I guess I really did just want to acknowledge that, because it's such a huge, she's just been such a huge part of my life, photographically for decades now. And the things that I learned with her in her classes way back in the, late 80s, early 90s I still think about them every single day. So I did want to mention that we lost Barbra Crane this week, who is an amazing photographer and an amazing teacher. And I'm going to put some links into the podcast notes where people can check out our work, because I think that it is pretty much the most varied body of work you're ever going to come across. I mean, she was a hugely experimental photographer who did, everything from straight photography, very kind of traditional straight photography to really experimental stuff. A lot of stuff with Polaroid materials and instant photography, alternative processes. So her body of work is just truly, truly incredible. And I just took a lot of inspiration from the way that she looked at the world. And in particular, and I think about this all the time, in particular, the way that she thought about and talked about sequential photography. So, the importance of sequencing photographs together and what they mean when you put them together or repeat them or layer them. That's something I really picked up entirely from Barbra. And I think about this literally every time I post something on Instagram. I mean, I think about what the photo was I posted before it, what the photo I'm going to post after it is, and it really makes me more thoughtful about the images I share and the way I share them. And even the pictures I take. I feel like the way I kind of go through the world photographically is I see something and then I look for other things like that. And it's almost like it's like a constant non-ending stream of things that are somehow vaguely related that I'm seeing. And the things I learned from her shape the way I put a camera up to my eyes, like literally every time I do it. And I just wanted to say how grateful I am to Barbra for that, and just how much that meant. And she was just a wonderful person, an amazing photographer. And I just learned so much from her that I really felt like I wanted to acknowledge in some way the fact that, we did lose her this week, but she had an amazing life and did just incredible work and helped and taught so many photographers. So yeah, Barbra Crane, thank you so much for everything. And I think about you literally every day doing photography, and I'm so grateful. So I'll put some links to Barbra's work and, check those out for sure. And I don't know.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, maybe I don't know that we want to do it today. I'm not suggesting we do, but, I'd love to have an episode where we just talk about photographers that have influenced us, and maybe people who are not even, not even the greats that maybe a lot of people know about, but just people that we follow on Instagram or wherever that influence us, that are making work, every day around us. I think would be a great topic at some point.
Yeah, that's something that I would love to do an episode on as well. But I was looking through some of the links that you sent earlier of her work, and you're right. I mean, it's so varied. There was that one article you sent that was talking about her time as one of the first foreign photographers allowed into China.
Yeah.
And she's got some really amazing documentary stuff there. But then she's also got like abstract nudes. And the entire spectrum is pretty much covered there. But I think the thing that you were saying earlier about her influence on the way that you look at sequential photography is super interesting, because there's a lot to be said. Anyone can get lucky, right, and shoot a bunch of photos and end up with one amazing shot.
Right.
But it really takes a lot more thought to produce a coherent body of work. Yeah. And I think like the photographers that like are most influential to me as photographers are the ones whose body of work speaks to the way that they saw the world and the way that they approach their photography, as opposed to like, oh, I like this photographer because he produced this like one image, or she produced this one image that like totally blew my mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that for sure.
The other thing is, you mentioned that she was both a photographic influence as well as a mentor, and that's really interesting. I mean, if you're comfortable talking about it, I'm actually really curious to know what kind of mentorship she did with you, because when it comes to photographic influences, from my perspective, I can think of like photographers whose body of work I consider like a huge influence on me. Yeah. But then I also think of like photographic teachers who have also been really influential on me, not because of their body of work, but because of the way they actually like taught. But I can't think of anyone who is both for me. But it sounds like you're talking about her in both of those terms.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think part of that is that the way she taught, it felt very personal. Like there was a lot of personal time with her. And even like after, I didn't spend a lot of time. Well, I shouldn't say that. I did in the years after I graduated from, the Schoolyard Institute here in Chicago. For at least a decade after that, I spent a lot of time with her, and I actually worked with her a bit. She was she had this summer. Well, just a house in Michigan in the forest. And it was this kind of amazing. It was like being in a tree house. And it was like this house up in the trees, and it was surrounded by trees. And in her house, she just had all this stuff she collected, just these, natural things and non-natural things, like things that she would find while you were out walking around. But like little wasp nests and, interesting pieces of wood and all this stuff and rocks. And she had all this stuff, and it was like surrounded by these things that she would collect that then would become part of things she would photograph. So they'd end up in the photographs too. And so I actually worked with her on prototyping a book that she did for one of these bodies of work. So I worked with her quite a bit in scanning some of her images and sequencing them together into into book format to see how they work together. And so I worked with her sort of somewhat professionally a little bit too. But I mean, I've got way more out of that probably than I gave to her ultimately. I mean, she did, publish some things based on that, but I got to actually work with her and talk about the stuff that I was doing, and the same sort of approach where sequencing images. I mean, I was doing some of that as well, and it really ultimately led to my interest in half frame photography, because the sequencing aspect of half frame images is just like a natural thing that seems to come out of working in that format. You end up putting 2 or 3 or more images together kind of in sequence. So I really learned that from Barbra, and that was a primary reason that I have such an interest in half frame photography is that element of sequencing and how images work together in sequence. So she really, in the years after I graduated, it was like the things that we had talked about in the classroom, I continued talking with her about after as well. And I feel like, it can be really difficult if you're, studying a subject like that, and then you graduate and you kind of go off into the world and do your own thing and get a job and do this and that. But I felt like I got to continue having like this, student-teacher relationship with her, but it's different once you're, not a student anymore. And so that was a huge influence on me, and kind of kept me wanting to make photos and really being particular about what I wanted to make photos of, which I feel like I still am, now as well. So that's really where I feel like she, going beyond being just a teacher, it was above and beyond any other, kind of relationship I had with a teacher at any other point in my life. So it was really just a unique time spent with her doing that.
That's so cool, because I mean it must be such an amazing experience being able to not only like learn from, but work with someone who sounds like she was an amazing teacher, but also as a photographer has a body of work that you just like admire. Because the photography sort of teachers that I've had or the workshops I've gone to, there's never been that overlap between the two. I had a darkroom teacher for when I was taking classes at Hart House in the University of Toronto, and he was an awesome teacher, specifically because he was super, super critical and super harsh. So when I would make like prints and shots, develop shots in the darkroom and bring them and show him, he would be like, "Oh, that's crap, that's crap, that's crap, that's crap, that's crap, that's crap, that's crap." Right. So then finally, when there's one shot where he's like, "That's a good shot," here's why, and you printed that well, and here's what you did well. It's so satisfying.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be able to tell you any of his work. Like, I don't even remember his name. It was that long ago.
Wow.
Whereas, but that leaves that whole experience left a lasting impression on me because, one of my other teachers, he gave me a really hard time for always shooting with telephoto lenses back in the day. He was like, look, all you do is pick out a subject and make it sharp. And, that you're like trapped in this tunnel vision. And he forced me to spend like 2 weeks shooting with a 35 millimeter lens. And that just like completely like rewired my brain in terms of how I was going about shooting and composing. But again, I wouldn't be able to tell you like even their names. I don't remember. Whereas when I have taken like workshops with more well-known photographers or even a couple of Magnum photographers, like they were really impersonal. They were, you could see why photography was their profession. Why that kind of Magnum style documentary photography was their profession, because they really weren't good with people, and I was like learning nothing from them. Even though I think their work is mind blowing. So I've never had that experience of like learning from someone directly whose work also I find amazing. It's always been a sort of separate, indirect inspiration or like direct teaching experience.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I've had teachers like that too. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and I do kind of miss that because, nowadays you post something out on the internet and it's always like, oh, it's amazing, like. And it's all this kind of positive reinforcement and external validation. But I do enjoy, having someone who knows what they're talking about and whose opinion I respect just rip the crap out of my work.
Right.
Because it just makes it all the more satisfying when you produce something that again, this is good stuff.
Yeah, and she would do that too. I mean, she would very honest about what she thought about work, and she definitely had opinions, and in a good way. I mean, it was really, really helpful to hear that because it made you push yourself, harder to do work that was most in tune with where you were trying to get to. And I think what you said about bodies of work, to me, that's a really important concept is how does what I'm shooting fit into a larger context of other things that I photograph? And it's like saying, well, I do, street photography or whatever, but it's a certain thing that I'm trying to do within that kind of genre of something that we could give a name to. I'm trying to do it in a way that I know is my own take on it, right? And I think that's the part that is really difficult, is finding your own vision within that larger context that is easy to put a label on, and it's trying to figure out where you fit within that, right? And so I feel like Barbra, that's the way she worked, and I think it encouraged me to think about working that way as well, and to look for the deeper context of things that I'm doing, and how they all relate together. And then that leads to the next body of work, and that's what I found really amazing about her work, is that she did these incredibly varied things, but they all grew on each other and from each other in certain ways. I mean, sometimes an idea just comes completely out of the blue, but I feel like most ideas come from making other work. And somehow that making other work stuff, that's where you get the ideas. And then the other thing I learned from Barbra is she used to call it happy accidents, that she really embraced the random and the accidental. And she had like entire bodies of work based on, shooting maybe some Polaroids and the flash power was up too high. And, it kind of blew everything out. And then she did an entire huge body of work of Polaroids that are just like these blown out flash shots where it just becomes about shapes and everything. And so embracing the accidental, I mean, part of it, honestly, I think is a very part of the male genius school of photography where it's like you're this genius and you do it all right because you're a genius or whatever. And Barbara was like, she wasn't that way. It was like she understood like the things that happen accidentally are sometimes the very best things. And that's kind of embracing mistakes and realizing that that's where some of the most creative things come from, I feel like is a very different way of approaching it all when you're already a really well-respected and renowned photographer. I mean, you don't have to necessarily ever acknowledge you make mistakes, right? But rather, I mean, actually saying no, mistakes are like primal. They're like the primal part of what you do. And I think, so I think learning that embracing the stuff that is not what you thought was going to happen is just as important as the mental part of you that's calculating what you want to do or how you want to make an image. You have to embrace the things that come along sort of accidentally that you're not expecting also.
Yeah, Hamish has an article out today about like a broken camera that he shot with and kind of embracing the mistakes, because he had a bunch of pictures of his daughter that had red light leaks all over the place. And he just wanted to chuck the thing, but his wife ended up like absolutely adoring the pictures and kind of forcing him to sit down and look at sort of the images for what they were. And they kind of he grew to like them as they went through that process. But I totally know what you mean. And I think that's something that I experience a lot more shooting film than with digital.
Right.
Because when you're shooting digitally and there's a mistake in the shot, or like something happens that you didn't intend, there's almost a temptation of like, oh, that screwed up the shot. And some people would even delete the photo. Whereas like when you're going through the process of developing the film, especially if you like wait a while before you develop it and you sort of forget what's on the roll, and you look at the images and you're like, whoa, I didn't know that, this thing was here. Like, so there's one of my photos that I don't think I've shared, was from a series of sort of street work that I was working on in Hong Kong. And it's this picture of this woman kind of walking past this like really geometric background. But when I developed the image and I got it back, there was a dude's head in the foreground, like completely occupying the bottom right of the frame that I had not noticed, like as he was walking straight in front of me.
Wow.
But his face, the kind of position of his face, and the woman's face were like exactly mirroring each other. And they were both wearing like pretty similar looking glasses. So there was like the main subject and then this like giant bokeh head, which was like a male head that was sort of a magnified version of her head. And I remember seeing the picture being like, yo, that makes it so much better, even though not only is that an error, like I didn't even realize that was something that was even in front of me as I was making the photo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I think if I was shooting that digitally, I would have seen it right away, and I might have even just like chucked it or tried the shot again.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. I think there's a lot to that. It's too easy to just delete things with digital. So if you don't think you got it right there in the moment, you just delete it and go to the next thing. So.
Yeah, and the diversity of the body of work you were talking about is fairly rare to see, I think. The only photographer I can think of who, off the top of my head, who has like a similarly like insanely diverse body of work is Sebastião Salgado.
Oh yeah! Oh my gosh! Right.
This guy, his work is just insanely diverse. But I think because I have a couple of his books, I think if you sort of look at the work, I can see exactly what you're describing, where some of the earlier work, even though the subject matter is totally unrelated, you can sort of see how it informs the progression of his later work. And there's a really cool documentary about his life where he actually talks about that transition from shooting like oppressed miners to like nature, and how it's all part of a journey of growth as a human being as well as a photographer. So there's like the common thread that links all the work is him, right? And when you've got a diverse body of work, like Barbra did, I think, you know, obviously I didn't know her, but even looking at her photos, I think you can see that there are elements of her in all of her work, and that really like links all of it together, right?
Right. Exactly. And I guess that's, you know, my thought is that I would hope that all of my work, somehow it, you know, there's that truth in it that's your own personal thing, that makes it uniquely yours. I mean, that's the hope anyway, right? I don't know if we, it's hard to achieve that, but that's the hope of where it hopefully goes. So, yeah. Yep. All right. Well, yeah, thanks, Perry, for those. Yeah, really, I'm glad we could chat about that. That really means a lot to me. I've really been thinking about it a lot this week, and just wanted to chat about it a little bit.
Yeah, that was great. And, you know, obviously we'll put some links to her work in the show notes, because I think it's really worth checking out.
Yep, for sure. All right. Well, we have, do we want to do, I know we have a few emails. Do we want to do those, or do we want to save them, or what's your thought, Perry?
I think we should wait for Simon to get back before we do those. Because, you know, that makes more sense. Are there any, I mean, that guy who emailed a couple of weeks ago saying, like, stop talking about photography, only talk about gear, no emotion. Do we need to get back to lenses a little bit to sort of round things out?
I suppose we could, right?
A little bit, or any acquisitions or anything you want to talk about?
Well, actually, okay. So if we want to go back to gear, there is one email question here that is very gear focused, and it was addressed to me. So maybe we could do that one, because we could talk about it, right? You know what I'm talking about? It's the one about. Yeah. Okay. So we'll do one email, and I have the camera in question here in front of me, so we can talk about it. So the question is from Jermaine, and Jermaine asks, he says, hello, CLP. I recently got a Canon 50mm f1.8 in a trade, and was reminded by all the times that Johnny had talked about this lens and the camera he pairs it with the Canon 4SB. So I went and bought my own Canon 4SB too. Normally I shoot a Nikon F90X, but I do own an Olympus SP, so I am accustomed to rangefinders. However, what baffles me on the Canon is the viewfinder switch. I haven't quite figured out a workflow that does a good job of utilizing this feature. My question to Johnny then is, do you just leave it in one position like 1.5x, or do you switch it back and forth? As a side point, I feel like the tricks and finesse of operation older gear is something nobody ever really talks about. Thanks, Jermaine. So what Jermaine's talking about is on the Canon rangefinders, and I'm not sure, I don't know that all of them have this feature, but certainly the Canon 4SB and the 4SB2 have this feature. I have both of those cameras, and so basically up on the upper left side of the camera, there's a little switch which is located just below the rewind knob. And that switch has three settings. It has a setting that says F, a setting that says 1x, and a setting that says 1.5x. So as you turn that switch, as you can imagine, it magnifies the image in the viewfinder. So you basically either have the F, which is like the widest, and then it gets progressively tighter. So there's the 1x and the 1.5x. So I guess, I mean, my understanding is that I think it's is it the F? Is it basically the equivalent of a 50mm viewfinder? Mm-hmm. And the 1.5x I thought was equivalent of like the 100mm lens, and I guess that would make the 1x in the middle. I could be wrong about that, but it kind of makes no difference to me, because I'll tell you, I guess, how I use them. I tend to just leave it on the F setting, which is the widest setting, unless I'm doing something with really critical focus, and then I'll move it to the 1.5 F position. But generally, I'm using it, I guess, in that widest setting. But to be honest, I don't use the viewfinder on the camera for framing images. Even with a 50 millimeter lens, I use an external viewfinder on Barnack style cameras, which I actually much prefer. I prefer to use that window just for focus, and then use the external viewfinder for framing, because to me, even the Canons, which I think are better than any Barnack style Leica as far as size of the viewfinder window, I still find them too squinty for the most part, and I much prefer framing with a bright line viewfinder always. So I love, actually the thing I enjoy most about Barnack style cameras, and my favorite are the Canons. The thing that I enjoy most about that experience is using the external viewfinders. So I only use that for framing. It's not really a diopter. I mean, it's a magnified view. So, but I only use it for focus, and I use an external viewfinder for framing. So that's how I do it in terms of my own personal workflow. And I'm pretty sure if I pulled up the manual for the 4SB, it would say exactly what each magnification was equivalent to in terms of focal length, because that's my understanding is basically how you would use that. So, Perry, I don't know if you have insights on that one.
I've had a couple of these Canon rangefinders. I totally get the external viewfinder thing, because when it comes to Barnack style cameras, I don't like the integrated finders, because they where the viewfinder and the rangefinder are integrated, because they tend to be kind of dim.
Yeah.
So the thing I like about cameras like the Leica 3F are the actual framing window is super clear, even though it's kind of small and squinty. But the question that I have for you then is, if you're using the finder just for focus, why would you not keep it in fully zoomed in mode all the time then?
I think because when I pull it up to my eye, it's sort of like that thing that happens when you, especially with digital cameras that have a zoom on them. If you start with it zoomed all the way in, it's where am I? Where am I here? I don't know where I am. So I tend to leave it wider, because it's just easier to see what I'm observing without the camera to my eye that I want to photograph. It's closer to what I want to see, right, in the viewfinder. So yeah, and what we're referring to, the technical name of this is the magnification control lever, because I'm now looking at the manual. I generally start with it all the way on the widest setting, and I only sort of zoom it in if I'm really doing critical focus. But to read from the manual, it says the 1x position corresponds to the image seen and recorded by any Canon lens with a focal length of 100 millimeters. So the 1.5 setting is 135, and the F setting is 50 millimeters.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. So there are some other non-Barnack style Canon rangefinders, like the Canon L and those ones with the little dial where you can switch the viewfinder magnification.
Yeah, right.
So I remember, on most of those, they have a 35, a 50, and then an RF setting, which supposedly has a field of view similar to 135, but you're kind of supposed to just use it for precise focusing. But I haven't heard of many people switching between it. I think most of the time, you would just keep it at whatever magnification corresponds to your shooting. And then only switch it to the maximum magnification if you want really, really critical focus.
Yeah, that's exactly how I approach it. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that second part of the question about tricks and finesse of operating older gear, we can do an entire episode on that, because I think there's so many cool little, there's just so many cool little tricks with specific cameras and specific camera lens pairings. Yeah. For example, right? On my it's not that old, but on my Konica Hexar RF, there are a few specific lenses that I can operate that camera one-handed, because the focus tab is like just in the perfect position that I can basically use my left hand to like hold an umbrella if I'm shooting in the rain or, I don't know, protesting, and like use my my middle finger to move the focus tab, knowing where the kind of zone positions are.
Right.
And my index finger on the shutter. And there's like all these weird little things with different cameras. That would be super cool to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you could do a whole episode just on Barnack style cameras and all the quirks. And because I mean, I have a bunch. That's part of what I love about those cameras is they're, to me, in a weird way, they're almost the most intuitive camera you can ever use. And it's also kind of the most, you know, archaic in a lot of ways, but they're really, really simple once you get in the zone with them and understand all those little tricks. So yeah, that'd be a great conversation as well.
So quick question on that, because I love Barnack style cameras as well, but the reason I don't use them very much is because they are so annoying to load. Do you have a specific method of loading Barnack style cameras?
Yeah, kind of actually.
So let me tell you what I do first, because it might be idiotic. When I carry like a 3F or something, basically what I do is I have a pair of tiny scissors that I keep in my camera bag. And I basically will, do what they tell you to do and just trim the leader and then like shove the thing in with great difficulty. Sometimes I'll even pre-trim a few liters if I'm shooting quite a bit.
That's what I do. Yeah.
Okay. Because there are, websites online that tell you to do crazy shit. Like, put the shutter on bulb.
Yeah.
Like, open the shutter and stick your fingers into the, through the shutter and like move the film around. Or you could just cut the leader and not like stick your finger in the shutter.
Right. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. Me and Bob Matter was in the shop about a week ago, and we had that same little conversation. He had a 4SB with him, and we did that. We kind of did it right there on the spot, and we trimmed the leader, and we dropped it in, and that's what I do. I just carry the leaders pre-trimmed. I count 20 sprocket holes, and I notch them out, up to 20 sprocket holes, and I don't know. I'm to a point where I can actually do it while I'm walking. I can just put a roll in and it works, But I think pre-trimming the leaders helps a lot. The other thing that I figured out with the Canons was they have these nice take-up spools that have this like spring-loaded end on them. So and the idea is that it's easier to hold the roll when you put it back in the camera, and I actually find the opposite to be true. I find that then I'm trying to get the spring thing to recatch. So what I do is I'll put the film on the take-up spool, lock down the spring-loaded bit, and then put it into the camera with it, already kind of the spring already back in place. And I find that a lot easier than putting it in and then turning the spring. And it just, to me, I feel like if you trim the leader and you don't force it and you slide it in real easy, they go in great. And then the only difficult part is really, to me, the hardest part, which is making sure that the sprocket holes are falling over the spool, like not in, you don't want the sprocket ring to be in between the perforations. You want the perforations on the wheel, which is really hard to see. But I feel like most of the time, if you have dropped the film in right, it just kind of falls on that naturally.
It does it itself. Yeah.
I feel like I obsess over that more than it's not. It's like it's always right, but I just worry it isn't.
Right.
So, but no, I guess pre-trimming the leaders makes all the difference.
That's
and
yeah. Because I don't do that because it forces me to commit that roll to the Barnack style camera. Yeah. And I'm never convinced that I'm gonna shoot like multiple rolls. Usually when I take them out, it's just for fun, and then when I'm shooting seriously, it'll be like on an M or something.
Yeah.
That would make my life a lot easier because like I bought a specific pair of like tiny foldable scissors that are no bigger than like maybe 2/4. Yeah. And I carry that around. But then every time I want to change a roll of film, I have to find a bench and sit there like an idiot, kind of
right,
like with these tiny pair of scissors, like trimming away at the leader, trying to get it in.
It's funny. I had at another time at the shop. So somebody came in and explained to me that this was very much by design, that you were supposed to, when you change the film on your Barnack style camera, you were supposed to go to a cafe, get a coffee, get a croissant, and you're supposed to sit there and have a little break and change your film. And that completely makes sense to me.
But didn't like photojournalists shoot wars with Barnack style cameras? Wasn't that some of like the original ethos? I don't buy that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of really cool photos floating around of like two Barnacks connected at the base plate. So when one ran out of film, you just flip it over and start shooting the other one.
Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'll have to see if I can find the photo. I think it was actually a Russian photo of a Soviet wartime photo of a camera set up that way for someone who was shooting, in a war zone in the Second World War. So fun stuff.
Well, I think Barnacks are underrated. The 3F with a collapsible Elmar or Industar is the only rangefinder other than the Olympus XA that will just fit in my pocket. And I love that. Yeah,
I think that I think they're brilliant. I think they're in a lot of ways the most intuitive camera you can ever use. Not the easiest, but the most intuitive. So yeah, good stuff. So thanks for the question. That was a good one. And we'll do the other questions later. Oh, I did have one other thing I want to mention, and this was because I received it in a private message from Nigel Cliff. After the What Was the Question episode. And Nigel said, as a clarification, he says, Johnny, when I mentioned the big boys, I was meaning, is there anything amongst the lesser lights, such as Tamron, Sigma, Chinon, Yashica, etc.? So that was Nigel's clarification of the question he was asking. What was the question?
I don't remember. I don't think that makes it easier.
Oh man. So we miss you, Simon.
Yeah.
I hope everything's okay, and we wish you were here.
Yeah. So I guess time-wise, this is where Simon would jump in and say we should start winding things down.
Yeah, we should start winding things down. Yeah.
I do want to talk quickly about one lens, because I did. Even though I was on vacation, I managed to get a new acquisition.
Okay.
Well, sort of. So before I left on vacation, there's actually a member of the Photography with Classic Lenses Facebook group who I got in touch with, and he sold me this lens on a private sale. So it's a lens I've been going after for a while because, it's no secret that I enjoy obscure Japanese LTM lenses. And it's the Topcor 35mm f2.8 in LTM mount. Now, the RE auto version of this lens is highly, it has a stellar reputation, but it's very, very uncommon to see the LTM version. It's the only 35mm lens Topcor made, and I only bought it because this is pure gas. There's no reason for me to buy this lens. It has the same optical design as the Leica Summeron. But I've been lusting after this stupid LTM Biogon for so long, and they're so expensive. The ones in Hong Kong, every time I go and try one, I don't like them because they feel like Jupiter 12. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to get this one because it's not a Biogon optically, but it's going to satisfy that gas for like a super cool 35mm f2.8 lens in LTM, because I sold my Canon. And I just got it the day I got back. It's sitting on my M6 right now, and it's tiny.
Yeah.
It's so small. I haven't had a chance to shoot with it yet because, again, I just got it. But there's two things that are really neat about this lens. I'm hoping that it'll have that sort of traditional Topcor pop. But the two things that really jump out at me are like, number one, the barrel of the lens, like it's tiny, but it looks a lot like a contact. It looks weirdly similar to a contact RF lens.
Right.
Because like when you turn the focus ring, there's like two moving pieces that move back and forth independently, which is much more similar to like the 35 Biogon and contact RF mount. Because most of like these LTM lenses, there's just like one moving piece, and so when you turn the focus tab or whatever, it just moves like the barrel back and forth right at the same distance. But then secondly, like the filter threads are really weird on this lens because there's a 40.5 millimeter thread on the outside, which also serves as an aperture ring. And then like, which is pretty standard for Topcor LTM lenses. But then there's a 34 millimeter thread on the inside, which I'm not really sure what that's for. But if you put a filter on the 40.5 thread, the inner 34 thread will hit the glass. And so if you screw the filter in too tightly, like you can't turn the aperture ring properly. So I don't know if there's a specific hood design for this, or like I pulled up an image and showed it to you earlier that they seem to use a specific type of filter adapter. Because like this was part of the design of this lens that was just like baffling me. But otherwise it's beautiful and tiny.
Right. And yeah, you sent that picture and I recognized that right away because that it's a Series 6 adapter, which is really common for lenses from that era. That the way you would put a filter on them is you would put a Series 6 adapter and then you would put the right size filter on there, and then you would put either the retaining ring in front of the filter or you'd put a lens hood on to serve as a retaining ring and the lens hood. And it makes perfect sense when you look at it that way, because then the filter is not going to hit that front part of the lens, and it works perfectly. So yeah, that's a perfect solution for a lens like that, is a Series 6 adapter that you can then drop any filter into that adapter that you want to use. It's a sort of an elegant solution that kind of disappeared, I would say, in the SLR era, when all the manufacturers, they tended to want to stick with one filter ring size, so that if you bought a bunch of lenses from, say, Nikon, they were all going to be, 52 millimeter or something like that, or 55 or whatever. So that kind of went by the wayside, and the series adapter system was no longer quite as popular. But it's really brilliant for older stuff, and it's great for rangefinder lenses for sure.
So how does that work? Because the only lens I have with a series style filter is the 40 Summicron. So but that one, like, you drop the filter into the middle and then the hood screws over the top.
Right.
But this one, it sounds like there's like an adapter.
No, it's the same thing. You're the filter holder, or they call them an adapter because it's adapting the threads on the lens to Series 6 filter size, which is a standard size. So that's why they get called adapters, but they're really not adapters per se. They're just filter holders.
So are you dropping the filter in the gap between the two threads?
Yeah, well, you're dropping it in the space. No, it's sitting in the ring itself. There's a space for the filter to sit in there, and then you just either screw the hood up on top of that, or you screw a retaining ring on the front of that, and then the filter is held in. Yeah, right. So, I mean that's all it is it's a way to attach the filters to the lens, but the idea is each filter, instead of each filter being individually threaded, the filter has no threads. It's just a piece of glass with, a metal ring around it. Or sometimes they don't even have that. Sometimes it's just a piece of glass. And then you just drop that into the holder. So it's really it's a filter holder, more than an adapter, but they get called adapters because technically they are adapting to the Series 6 filters. So it's the same thing, Perry. So the
adapter is just holding the filter in place, which is otherwise a free moving piece of glass.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So if you can just find a 40.5 to Series 6 adapter, then you're off to the races.
Oh, that's gonna be annoying to find locally, but
isn't there tons of stuff like that there? I would think there'd be.
The series adapters they're really hard to find. Like filters here, vintage filters here are they're much easier to find for SLR lenses than in those kinds of sizes.
Okay.
Like the 40 Summicron, for example, finding the series 5.5 filter for that is like nigh on impossible if it's not coming with the lens already.
Wow. Okay. Well,
like,
I got
filters. Yeah.
I've got loads of that stuff in the shop. So maybe I'll have to get you a care package together, Perry.
Yeah. I gotta find an excuse to head over to Chicago.
Yeah.
Those things are not easy to find here in Hong Kong.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. All right. Very interesting.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, congrats on the lens. I mean, that's it's a great lens, and I'm familiar with it in person only because Robbie J got one a few weeks ago, and he brought it in, and we were messing around with it. So it's a really, really nice lens, and I gotta imagine you're gonna love it. And yeah, it really reminded me of the Zeiss 35 3.5 planar for the contacts. It's really similar in terms of looks and size and weight. So
yeah. It's really interesting because there aren't that many like that in LTM. But the thing that I'm struggling with right now is like I do have a screw-in filter on it. I just don't screw it in all the way. The thing I'm struggling with right now is what camera to put it on. I've got it on my M6 right now. I think I like it better on my M2, but for a really stupid reason that I mentioned earlier. And it's like it's a silver lens, and it doesn't come in black, so I'm much more comfortable using it on my M6. But like I do have that strange. I don't know why I don't like putting silver lenses on black cameras. Like it just looks so much better on a silver camera. Like the Canon 50 1.5 LTM, it's beautiful on the M2. I think it looks stupid on my M6. I would use it on my M2 way more.
I can understand that. There's something to that.
Really?
That makes sense. Yeah, I think so. I'm a big fan of the Voigtlander super wides, the wide angle lenses, and I don't ever use my 21 millimeter Voigtlander LTM on a Canon rangefinder. It just wouldn't look right.
Okay. Yeah.
So but I'd rather
color.
Yeah, but I get it. I get what you mean about things not looking right. But yeah, the color thing, you just don't like that panda look or that zebra look or
the reverse look. I'm totally fine with a black lens on a silver camera. I think that's totally fine. Just when you put a silver lens on a black camera, it looks really weird to me. Whether it's digital, old film camera, rangefinder, SLR, it's just like, yeah, there's something my brain just looks at it and goes, no. That's
it's like wearing shorts with black socks versus white socks, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah, I gotcha. That makes sense to me. I feel you, Perry.
Good.
All right. Well, with that, should we wrap it up then? Get this get this audio over to Simon so he can still, because Simon in theory could hear us, he just couldn't do the recording, and his connection was really bad because he was on his phone. So Simon's still going to be working on this today. So we're going to get this audio over to Simon so he can do his engineering magic. So yeah, I guess we should go ahead and wrap up. Perry, do you want to tell us where we can find you? On Instagram, Flickr, and my website. They're all just PERRYGE and .com for the website. All right, and you can find me at System Photography on Instagram. You can find me at Central Camera Company in Chicago every day except for Sunday and Monday. And please stop in and say hello. It's the best part of my day when people do that. That would be great. And I guess we should talk about where Simon can be found, right? I've heard this enough times. We should know that. He's Simon 4 somewhere, and
Fozzie on eBay.
Fozzie on eBay, and he has some Italian adapters. No, he has adapters that have an Italian name, sort of. Some that he sells.
Simon Forster Photographic.
Yeah, that one.
.co.uk, and I think that's his Instagram tag as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So there's that, and then you can keep up with the podcast obviously at our home, which is Classic Lenses Podcast at classiclensespodcast.com, and you can email us at classiclensespodcast@gmail.com. And of course on Instagram, be sure to check out Best Vintage Lens, where a friend of me of the show, Ricardo, posts the amazing notes and critique from each episode, which we love and are better than the show itself. So you definitely want to check those out as well. Any other parting words, Perry?
No, I think this is where Simon would just say, well, wait, do we have anyone to thank or any shout outs?
I don't have any this week, personally.
Me neither. I don't know if we have any like coffee donations or anything to. Well, if we do, we'll read them out next week.
Yeah, if we do, we'll read them out next week. Simon will read them out next week. So we'll get to the Ko-fi donations there. But yeah, thank you for the Ko-fi donations. Thank you for the emails. We do greatly appreciate them. So I guess we'll sign off. We will.
Where Simon would say, "Hope you've enjoyed the show." And
yes, if you can.
Like Carl.
You like Carl. All right. Take care, all. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.